South Africa is a highly unequal society. There are those who believe that perhaps we need to change things when it comes to executives. When a company doesn't do well, you'll find that people will be retrenched, but executives, their salaries don't change. Instead, they even get bonuses. Do you think there is credence or there is an argument to make in that to say, well, we need to review how we actually reward executives in South Africa?
The solution to executive pay is not to pay executives less. No, it's to pay the ordinary workers more, not less, more. Because when we talk about being the most unequal society in the world, we just took over from Brazil with a Gini coefficient of 0.69, round off the figures to 0.7. Actually, what we're talking about is income inequality. But if you look at asset inequality, it's 0.95. It's not sustainable that 1% of the population owns 90% of the wealth. It's not sustainable that 10% of the population occupies 70% of positions of leadership. It's not. That's why business needs to transform so that, again, we are just broadly reflective. Therefore, this notion of ensuring that it is business that takes a lead, it is business that says we must pay our people decent wages so that they can afford the goods and services that we produce. Because if they don't, then clearly there is a problem. It is being progressive because you are creating the market of the future. This is what resilience, not just sustainability, is all about.
I'd like to wrap up the conversation and look at consequences. South Africa is apparently a consequenceless society when you find people who have been fingered in having their hands on the piece of the pie where they had no business being in there. We are seeing currently the whole Nissan situation playing itself out where the CEO could possibly be jailed. Should there be a situation in South Africa, or what are your views on a situation in South Africa where we see the jailing of people who have been found to be identified to have done wrong?
I could not agree with you more. One of the most critical jobs a leader does is to be absolutely honest about people's abilities and capabilities. What we have witnessed in the world, not just in South Africa, sad, tragic and regrettable, is that private business has been complicit in bribery, stealing and cheating, complicit in corruption, VW emission scandal, McKinsey, SAP. The list is endless. And it cannot be because it degrades the legitimacy of business. It takes away from the legitimacy of conscientious, responsible capital. So here we have a wonderful example in VBS. VBS is not state capture. VBS was looting at an industrial scale. 2 billion people of mostly poor people's money and municipalities. So you are taking from you and I. Here we have a good example of this ANC-led government to demonstrate that it is serious about rooting out and defeating corruption. People must go to jail very quickly because the evidence is incontrovertible and irrefutable. And it must happen quickly because justice must be seen to be done. Before we go to the 10-year project of state capture, before we talk about corruption at all levels of national, provincial, and indeed local government, at the moment, all the state-owned enterprises are trading recklessly by just a few. Eskom's debt is unsustainable. SAA is broken. An award-winning African airline that used to have 70% market share of the domestic market, today a shadow of itself at 15%. All the competitors have grown, it has declined. It needs to be fixed. This is the regime that gave us Saudi Mutswening at the SABC and Ellen Chabalala. And today, they can't pay salaries. So you can see that everything that the old regime touched upon, it's bankrupt, it's broken, and it needs to be seriously fixed. We are poor because of the decisions that we have made as South Africans, the type of leaderships that we have made. You know that one decision on the opening nights of NASREC in 2017, the ANC elective conference, to say we'll give fee-free higher education to engineering students, made sure that we have a 50 billion rand hole. And it ensured that we increase VAT to 15%. This is the consequence that you have when you choose the wrong type of leaders who who don't know the difference between income and cash. And it behooves all of us to have a courageous, critical, but nonetheless courageous conversation that when we choose a deputy president of any organization, of any party, we are potentially choosing the next president of the country. Therefore, we need to be much more intentional, deliberate, and purposeful about it. This notion of consequence management, it's a secondary function of every leader to say there must be a causal effect with what you do and the results that we get. Therefore, if you've done something wrong, there must be final accountability. In other societies, mostly in the East, when you have done something wrong, you fall on your sword. In this country, leadership is not about saying, no, but I've not been found guilty by any court of law, because we know that you can be absolutely legally right and so morally wrong. And that's what we have lacked for many years. The morality, the tenacity, temerity in the assessment of our facts for leaders like Nhlanhla to say, I've erred, no matter how small. Therefore, I am not worthy of this office. To respect the office that I occupy and the trust that has been put to me, I'm going to step aside. Because the more the ANC has defended its president, the more it has lost an opportunity to regain trust with ordinary citizens. Why does trust matter? Because trust is the glue that holds the ordinary citizens to these political parties. When you lose it, you are on a slippery slope to nowhere.
What is your hope for Africa?
I've got big hopes for Africa. I'm an eternal optimist. My hope for Africa says this is the century for Africa. Europe and North America mostly have all the cars and the white goods. The next areas of growth are in Africa. Every single solitary one of the mineral that the world needs is found as number 1 or number 2 in the continent of Africa. We know from empirical evidence that the price of commodities is going down, but the price of beneficiated goods is increasing. Therefore, there's no point in continuing to mine copper and gold and selling it raw as it is to the rest of the world to sell it back to us at 10 times the price. We need to be much more purposeful. It is the policy of this government. It ought to be the policy of the continent to say we must reindustrialize, we must beneficiate, we must localize, and we must create more black industrialists. Therefore, for me, I think the notion of Africa rising, of stand up Africa and be counted, is going to be driven by you and I, because the time is ripe for Africa to take its rightful place. 30.3 million square kilometers, the best coastline in the world. We have the sun shining 12 months out of 12. We should be the world authorities on solar energy. But Germany is. We produce the best cacao in the world. But the countries that are known as the world authorities on the best chocolate in the world, it's Belgium and Switzerland, not us. We need to be much more measured, purposeful, strategic, and deliberate about how we use the God-given wealth. South Africa is the number 1 gold producer for the first 20 years of our democracy. Now we are not even in the top 5. We used to produce 1,000 tons of gold a year. This year we produce 140 tons. Not because the gold is less. We are the only country that goes to 5 kilometers into the depth of the earth. Nobody in the world goes that far in Western Deep Level, now called Mponeng. And yet we're not using the skills acquired to build an underground. 1960s, for 1 billion rand, we said we couldn't afford. We are the only second country in Africa to have an underground after Egypt. And yet we know the way to prosperity, the way to connect cities is to build transport. And here, black people mostly are still spending 60% of their income on transport and food. It's not sustainable. It's not deliberate. It's not purposeful. So for me as an African, I could not be more optimistic. The era for Africa, it's now. It's up to young people to make sure that we realize it in our lifetime. And it's not going to happen on its own. It's about thinking, it's about being purposeful, it's about documenting, it's about writing, it's about lifting as we rise.